Social media can be very intimate, and yet at the same time, it connects us to others all around the world. Thus, there are two ways of experiencing social media. One way is to realize it as a personal setting, the other is to realize it as a public setting. People who approach social media as a personal setting recognize that their profiles are always available and that they are constantly accessible in much the same way that we are at work or at home. So when they, say, upload a YouTube video, they are prepared for the sorts of reactions you might get from friends or family or neighbors or coworkers, people you know and who know you personally, and they will take whatever feedback they get personally as well. On the other hand, people who approach social media as a public setting recognize that their profiles are on the internet and that the internet is populated by billions of people. So when they upload a YouTube video, they are prepared for the sorts of reactions you might get from a complete stranger, or an audience, or a columnist, or even an angry mob. People who don't know you and don't care to know you, but only care about what you have stated in public. They will not take the feedback they get personally. And that's fair enough for the latter, but for the former, this represents a grave problem. For those who regard social media as a personal setting, a negative reaction to something that they've published or posted must feel like 1,000 people in their home screaming in their face from dawn until dusk. It's no wonder then that these two points of view regularly collide. Carlos Maza is the host of Strike Through on Vox. Steven Crowder is the host of Louder with Crowder. Both offer political commentary, Maza from the left and Crowder from the right. But for a few years, a one-way debate of sorts took place in the form of Steven Crowder producing videos that rebutted Carlos Maza's videos. Rebuttals that were not a prototype of decorum, as Maza was regularly referred to by names rather than his own name. By May of 2019, Mr. Maza had had enough. Taking to Twitter, he argued that the commentary provided by Mr. Crowder amounted to bigoted harassment and abuse, worthy of being banned from the platform. Crowder disagreed, arguing instead that his commentary amounted to criticism, which merely featured his brand of humor.
Of the tens of millions of cumulative plays on our rebuttals to Vox on this channel, every single one of them is about criticizing their ideas or incorrect assumptions. Every instance has been about fighting bad information with better information.
As for the platform itself, YouTube elected to penalize, but not to remove Louder with Crowder. The incident represented a collision between these two philosophies of social media. So, what were the arguments made on both sides? Well, one of the arguments made as to why Crowder should have been banned was that he was not allowed to make insulting comments on YouTube. And that's a particularly strong argument because it is, if only technically, correct. Within YouTube's terms and conditions regarding harassment and cyberbullying, it states not to post content that is deliberately posted to humiliate someone, that makes hurtful and negative personal comments, or that encourages others to harass individuals on YouTube.
If only YouTube had a policy against hurtful content. Specifically, and I mean, it would be crazy if this existed, a policy against content that makes hurtful and negative personal comments, videos about another person. Oh, that's right, they do.
These kinds of rules are perfectly reasonable when interacting with others in a personal setting. Avoiding hurtful personal comments is entirely appropriate when interacting with people at school or at work, when making friends or visiting family members, etc. If you're deliberately trying to humiliate someone in your classroom, that's bullying. If you're constantly telling your neighbor what you think of their politics, that's harassment. These are infringements on an individual's personal space. But if somebody made hurtful, negative comments about an actor's performance, or a musician's new song, or a CEO's latest business strategy, or some politician's politics, we wouldn't consider that bullying or harassment, even if the comments themselves are just mean and dumb.
Kate Hudson is a dead-eyed trash bag that smells like low tide.
Why does Ryan Gosling always look like he's trying to squeeze a fart out without making any noise? Is that a gentleman?
Oh, how I loathe Nickelback. P.S. You, Wanda Sykes. What's wrong with Nickelback?
I would rather stab myself in the taint than hear another Nickelback song. That's funny. That's how we make Nickelback songs.
Unlike the private citizen who minds their own business, these people are public figures. Criticizing and or mocking public figures is likely going to hurt them and humiliate them naturally. But if we were not allowed to make hurtful, negative comments about public figures, we'd lose movie reviews, song parodies, boycotts, and even journalism. That's the argument made against these terms and conditions. They inadvertently prohibit criticism and or mockery on YouTube. However, the argument was not made on the other side that Mr. Crowder's criticisms were the issue. The issue was the repeated personal insults, obviously pointless and deliberately hurtful. This is another argument that focuses on the personal aspect of social media. If YouTube and Twitter and other sites are comparable to a front yard or a grocery store, then it doesn't matter how powerful or influential a figure is. Personally insulting them on social media is still an infringement on personal boundaries, and thus qualifies as harassment/abuse. That was the argument made by Maza himself, who compared YouTube to a playground at a grade school.
I hope that YouTube recognizes that the end result of this is not some happy medium. It's a place where only bullies operate. If the teacher never intervenes, the kids who are getting bullied at the playground will leave the playground.
The counter-argument, focusing on the public aspect of social media, is that YouTube and Twitter and other sites are comparable to any other public outlet. Suffice it to say, Mr. Maza is a public figure, and public figures are regularly lambasted on stage, on the radio, on television, in newspapers, in works of art, and on the street, both literally and figuratively. Why, then, should the same thing be viewed any differently on the second largest website on the internet?
The reason that bullying in high school is so unbearable, or in the workplace, for example, is because it's chronic, it's systemic. If you have a bully in high school, or if you have a boss or a supervisor who's a bully, you still have to go in the next day. You have to face that bully every single day. There's no way to get away from it. That's a big defining factor for me in bullying. Now, let's compare that to, for example, us doing a video or a rebuttal here, where maybe 2% of the video is us making light or us making fun of somebody in a way that they don't like. The thing is, that's not chronic, that's not systemic. You can shut it off. You can change the channel or online. You can just click on the next suggested video, which is probably turtle humping work boot.
At this point, the nature of Crowder's remarks are put into a very damning context. What with referring to Mr. Maza as some randomly scrambled version of these names, the repeated jabbing at Maza's ethnicity or sexuality or ability to pronounce the letter S were bigoted, racist, and homophobic.
Now, it's not just that he's debunking Carlos's videos that he deems bad, but he's also adding into these videos homophobic slurs. You can't just turn off Twitter or turn off YouTube and then walk away. He was texted to his personal phone. So this bleeds into your real life.
The usual claim made by the other side is that they were just jokes, and to a lot of ears, that sounds like a cheap excuse. But there is an argument behind it. Simply put, a statement or an expression cannot be bigoted if it isn't uttered by a bigoted person. In other words, it all depends on the ideology of the speaker. If Steven Crowder truly hates homosexuals or Latin Americans, then his remarks are bigoted. If he harbors no hatred for these groups of people, then his remarks are not bigoted.
I want to be really clear. Of course, I don't hate anyone at Vox. You've heard me say many times that context matters more than content. And in the era of clickbait, we've sort of lost sight of that. But context dictates your behavior. Now, it doesn't determine your values. Those always stay the same. Your morals stay the same. But the arena, the form in which you express them, of course, will dictate what's appropriate. For example, someone telling jokes in a nightclub, that's very different than the form of a collegiate debate.
What's the rebuttal? Well, the rebuttal to this point of view is that this doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter whether or not the speaker is bigoted. The remarks themselves are inherently bigoted, no matter what is or is not in the speaker's heart.
I feel like an idiot talking about this because anybody with a brain realizes that sandwiching a slur in between two non-slur comments does not change the content of the slur.
And so, ultimately, it comes down to a question of what's more important. Are the words themselves and their effect most important? Or are the beliefs and intentions behind those words what's most important? That brings us to the final argument made by Mr. Maza, which is that YouTube bears responsibility for his treatment. In much the same way that a teacher has to answer to the bullying of their students, or a boss has to answer to the harassment of their employees, a social media site has to answer to the treatment of its users. But according to the other side, Maza's argument implies that YouTube is a publisher, when it is, in fact, merely a platform. A publisher can be held accountable for its content because a publisher produces it. A platform, on the other hand, is just a place for individual users to generate their own content. So, the argument goes, whether it's defamatory statements, copyright infringements, or humiliation, YouTube cannot be held accountable. As a platform, they are a neutral party, kinda like a phone company.
Platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, these are the modern public square, obviously. Congress has acknowledged them as such. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act gives tech companies special immunity from being sued for defamation or fraud, immunity that we don't have on this channel, for example. And the purpose of this is to allow, quote, true diversity of political discourse. It's a high-minded cause.
In reality, the question of whether social media sites are platforms or publishers is a relatively complicated matter. There is truth to the argument that YouTube is responsible for its content. If, say for the sake of argument, some idiot uploaded a video that featured a corpse, YouTube would have a responsibility to remove that video. So that's basically what Mr. Maza is arguing, right? Wrong. That's just the half of it. You see, Mr. Maza didn't only argue that YouTube is responsible for removing certain content, he argued that YouTube is partly responsible for its creation via its algorithms, which are designed to recommend videos that are similar to what you have already watched.
These individual actors are not the problem. They are symptoms and the product of YouTube's design, which is meant to reward the most inflammatory, bigoted, and engaging performers. Steven Crowder is YouTube's ideal creator.
Well, by that token, YouTube has unwittingly promoted Steven Crowder. By the same token, YouTube has unwittingly promoted thousands upon thousands of other channels.
YouTube is really good at getting people to watch videos. That's what that somewhat insidious algorithm is designed to do. And while I have some philosophical problems with the company training neural networks to hack the human brain into watching more content, I recognize that every social media platform is doing that, and the ones that don't are going to end up losing out to the other ones, which is the situation we're in right now.
So this, let's call it YouTube wants clicks argument, is a fascinating argument because it might say more about human psychology than it says about social media or any algorithm. It could be that the platform shunted people toward this type of content, but it could also be that people already wanted it, and that the demand for it is really the concern, not so much the supply of it. At any rate, this problem still remains. We do not all approach social media in the same way. To many, social media is a stage or a town square. To many others, it's their bedroom or their neighborhood. Social media is still fairly new, and that might be why we have yet to agree unanimously on how it should be regarded. Until we do, if we ever do, debates just like the one regarding Carlos Maza and Steven Crowder will be had, poetically, on social media again and again and again. So what do you think? Do you regard social media as a personal setting, similar to your house or your job? Or do you regard social media more as a public setting, similar to a stage or a newspaper or a street corner? Hopefully, you'll feel comfortable contributing to this debate, regardless of your point of view.